Yes.
speaking of David Seymour, I don't want to get leave without talking about this clip that he did with Mihi
Mm.
Forbes, because we had you here originally. Well, we have been talking about specifically the Atlas Network. Now, it's a bit of a joke. How do you know when David Seymour's lying? His lips are moving. It's a joke. But certainly this doesn't look like a happy man answering a comfortable question. Lots of blinking. And I just want to play this while you're there. We'll have a look at it. And then want to get your take on what you see and what you understand of perhaps ACT's direct connection or not to the Atlas Group. Let's have a listen.
We did a story recently on the failure of the yes vote in Australia, which attempted to have Indigenous rights included in their constitution. It failed, but more interestingly, the support for the vote flipped once campaigning began. I think it took about 6 months. And those Indigenous Australians are now warning Māori that the same groups are behind this referendum. Are they, do you think?
Well, if you're about to go into the new Pizzagate of the left conspiracy theory, then I'll be real disappointed.
What's that, the Pizzagate?
That's some crazy conspiracy theory that Trumpists have in the US.
The campaign in Australia had links to the Atlas Network, a
Here we
network
go.
of think tanks which promote individual liberty and free enterprise, and it said that the network pushes opinion pieces in favour of free speech. Do the ACT Party have any links or connections to the Atlas Group?
No.
Have you spoken or taken advice from them or any group associated with them about the treaty? So, recently...
I can't believe you're doing this. I've read about this conspiracy theory and you're actually running it, but that's cool.
Well, no, I'm just trying to understand it because we went to Australia and we analysed the Yes campaign over there, and we spoke with Indigenous people about their fears about what would happen in the referendum. And so when you consider... actually you and I spoke about it. You said that you had met Lord Hannon, and then the TPU, the Taxpayer Union, had invited you to come along, and he spoke about this treaty and the possibility of a referendum. So isn't that, in fact, these movements and these groups talking about our referendum?
What, going along to meet someone who's a famous figure in world politics?
What did he come to New Zealand for?
I have no idea, but I was really pleased to have dinner with the guy. I mean, he's world famous as a politician. You get to meet him, hear what
But
he's got
you
to
went
say.
along to that function to listen to him, where he talked about the Magna Carta and the treaties. And
oh my God, the Magna Carta.
He did, and
Scandalous.
Well, I'm not saying that that's scandalous. I'm just saying this is what he talked about. I listened to it online because it was posted by the TPU, and so he talked about that, and he talked about the danger of the misinterpretation of treaties and what they meant. And and he also says what you say is that the judiciary is getting too involved, or they're making the interpretation of it is too wide.
You do know that people have had concerns about judicial activism.
I think we can leave it there. We've got the gist of what's been going on, talking about Lord Hannon, the Taxpayers Union, and I think perhaps not a mistake by Mihi, but one of the things she didn't say was they asked if ACT had any, quote, links or connections. They never asked if David Seymour had links and connections, because we know that he graduated in 2008 from one of their programs, has done the thing. So maybe they'll say that was still truthful, because maybe they'll say ACT doesn't. But I guess you've just watched it again with me. I'd just throw you the ball. What do you think about what Mr. Seymour had to say?
Well, it's very interesting just how touchy all of these people are.
Yeah.
They really don't want to talk about it. And that, given that, I've seen that Mr. Seymour was making a speech only a year or two before where he was talking about how all his great friends in the Atlas Network in Canada.
2021, he talked about them as my very good friends. Yeah, my very good friends, the Atlas Network.
Now, let's just go back. There's plenty of things we can say to answer that question. So much going on in there, and very interesting, all of these denials. So, yes, David Seymour has, I believe, an Atlas think tank MBA, which I had a look at. It's a 2-week course where basically they train their interns, and they're promising think tank directors in how to, as far as I can gather, how to use their internal grant making system, and how to do comms, and how to run a think tank. So how to get money from Atlas benefactors and donors, how to to maintain their funding profile and how to do their communications and campaigning. Mr. Seymour also has, as you know, biographies that were on his Wikipedia page, which have since been removed, show that he was involved around in 2007 to 2014 when he becomes an MP in New Zealand. He's in Canada now. What's he doing in Canada? He's working in two Atlas Network think tanks in Canada. One is the Frontier Centre for Public Policy. And interestingly enough, at the time that David Seymour is there, also on the advisory board are Ruth Richardson and Roger Douglas. Roger Douglas, and both of them are members of the Mont Pelerin Society. You have the Roger Douglas, who famously put New Zealand through one of the most radical neoliberalizations, deregulations, and privatization programs. Certainly at that time when it happened, it was remarkably radical and hard shock therapy. And then you have the finance minister and then a foreign minister from National. Both the finance ministers are on this think tank. What does that think tank do? Well, I went and Googled David Seymour the other day, and there was 7 or 8 pages of hits, but apparently they're starting to delete those links now as we speak. But and then he was also with another one called Manning Centre, which is another one. The Canadian Atlas is quite large. And the key object, as far as I can, from my point of view of looking at the history of petroleum industry, is that there's a great book by Jeff Dembicki called The Petroleum Papers, where he systematically reviews all those archival documents on climate files, which you can look up. There's a ton of primary documents that show that the oil industry knew everything about climate change going back to the 50s. But his argument in that book, Petroleum Papers, is that the oil in Canada is particularly dirty and polluting, right? The oil sands and the tar sands, Athabasca tar sands, they're called. That's the one. And in order for them to dig that up, they have to, it's all kind of soaked into the soil. So they have to use huge trucks and pile up this oily soil. They have to clear all the forest first, pollute all the rivers to do it. Then they pile it all up, and then they cook the tar sands with methane, right? With fossil gas, which has to be extracted and piped from somewhere else. And then they have to cook all this soil. So already, even before it goes to the refinery, it's got a huge carbon footprint. And his argument in that book is that the people that were investing there, Shell, Sun, and the Koch brothers own an oil refinery across the US border, which was for a long time, maybe still is, I'm not sure, the only refinery that could process this really dirty sulfurous crude, right? And his argument is that the whole campaign against that climate science isn't real came from Canada. That may be the case. But certainly it was happening everywhere as soon as the oil industry knew that the world knew about climate change and wanted to do something about it. So Canada has and remember I just mentioned that the first think tank outside of Britain that Anthony Fisher set up was the Fraser Institute, which is the oldest of the Canadian think tanks. Now, Manning is now called Canada Strong and Free, and it's based in the Alberta tar sands, which is the home of the radical reactionary right-wing forces in Canada. Very interesting. And then if we go and have a look at, Mr. O'Crampton of the NZI, he also has a background in Canada, PhD with the Mercatus Institute at the Koch brothers campus at GMU, right where the Atlas Network headquarters is. And then he worked for a while with the Reform Party of Canada, which was a kind of radical right party, the founder of which is Preston Manning, who, according to the literature which I've looked at, created this new ideology where the common folk, the good ordinary folk, the English-speaking folk, created an identity where they were the oil industry and the common people were one. And anyone that attacked the oil industry was attacking Canadianness, or what I mean. And this is a very common trope that we see now. So you've got this really interesting set of connections with the Atlas people in New Zealand to the Canadian tar sands oil industry. That's all I can say at this point. The other thing and now if we turn to, so why make these denials when they're so obviously, how do we account for Seymour's career between 2007 and 2014?
Make the denials, but there seems to be a constant theme now coming out from people who don't want to talk about it, that if anyone talks about it, then you are now, the conspiracy theorists are now labeling people who are talking about the Atlas Network as the new conspiracy theorists. So why deny it? And why does it seem with one voice, no matter who you speak to in and around that network group, if you want to talk about them, then you're a conspiracy theorist?
Well, it's very interesting you should say that, because I saw this interview, when it came out. Pizzagate at the left. I mean, this is the QAnon cult that there's a room full of pedophiles under a pizza shop. A pizza shop with no. We've got to make sure people know a pizza shop with no basement, but they're under no basement. Yeah, but a guy turned up with a gun. I read something. Some guy turned up with a gun, wanting to kill all the pedophiles under the pizza shop. That's how mental it is. And there was no basement. It's totally made up. All you have to do, to address that is they used to give this directory away, and then they realized that exposed the whole network, so they hid it. But if you just use the Wayback Machine, you can go and find it. And it's all there. And it's, the first book that was written about the Institute of Economic Affairs, it's called Thinking the Unthinkable, the Economic Counter-Revolution, published in 95. There's a whole, 10 pages on the Atlas Network in that book. So it's out there, it's just not well known. And, the evidence is all their own publications, which is, as I mentioned before, they're everywhere. So you just have to ask them about it, keep talking about the Atlas Network, and they'll keep on, I think, tripping over themselves, making these quite strange denials.